All right, students, welcome back. We are ready to start strategy 6 of TABE Reading M, and we've hit a bit of a milestone. We actually finished the first unit on main ideas and supporting details, and now we're ready to delve into vocabulary in a big way. We've got, I think, about 3 lessons that are about defining vocabulary that come up. Yeah, I mean words and phrases, defining words that are unfamiliar to you or maybe that you haven't even seen before. This is a really important skill for the TABE and the GED tests. You will see words that you are unfamiliar with. All of us do. And you don't have access to a dictionary or any way of looking up the word, but what you do have are strategies for determining the meaning of the word in text. And if you've watched the language video series, if you've been through the first one of those, I talked about context clues and defining words through context. So that's coming back into play here. But we're also going to talk about some other ways in which writers employ language, but also how we as readers determine the meaning, determine what they're trying to say with their words and phrases. And this lesson is actually on figurative language. This is one of my favorite topics. My degree is in creative writing, and figurative language is definitely something that we talk a lot about in that discipline. But figurative language is used in all types of writing. Even the most kind of informational technical writing uses figurative language to better communicate its ideas and to clarify its purpose. All right, let's dive into it. So our goal here is to learn what figurative language is and then become familiar with and recognize a few types. Okay, words can have literal meanings. That means they're used in their most basic sense. In other words, an explicit meaning. When words are used literally, the words mean what they say. Words, in contrast, can also have figurative meaning. So figurative is the opposite of literal. Then a word may mean something that is not obvious, so something different than its explicit dictionary meaning. For example, someone could be the head of a group. The head of a group is not actually the part of the body. He or she is a leader who guides the rest of the group the way a head guides the body. Figurative language can express thoughts and ideas in unusual ways. Figurative language comes in many forms. Here are examples. So in its most basic sense, figurative language is expressions that are stated in a way that somehow is contrary to their meaning. Usually for the effect of clarity or adding interest to a piece of writing. The good news is that we use figurative language in our daily lives all the time. We may not know that we're doing it. We may not know the terminology for specifically what we're saying, but we're familiar with the concept of figurative language, even if we don't know necessarily what to call it. And we're going to look at 6 types here. There are many, many more types of figurative language, but these 6 are the most common and certainly the ones that you could expect to see on TABE or GED. Before I even talk about them, to just look at the words, you may be thinking, those don't look like words that I would see in English every day. And they may not be. In fact, they're not English words. They come from ancient Greek. And these figurative language techniques actually go all the way back about 2,500 years ago to ancient Greek and the ancient Greek language. And so we have inherited these words, these terms for these particular types of figurative language from about 2,500 years ago, when the English language wasn't even a thing. Approximately 1,500 years before the development of English at all. So these techniques are things that writers have been doing long before the English language. People that talk like us have been around. Okay, first type is the simile, and that's how it's pronounced. We pronounce the E at the end. And it's a comparison of objects using the word like or as. In figures of speech or figurative language, we're trying to draw maybe an unlikely comparison between two things to emphasize something about one of those objects. And see in our example here, her smile was like the sun rising. We do things like this in speech all the time. Well, what are we trying to say about her smile? How about that it's bright? Both things are bright, her smile and the sun rising. In a real practical sense, her smile and the sun are not related in any way, but we are drawing a comparison between the two things. And to qualify as a simile, it must have one of these two words, like or as. We have like here. It should appear between the two things that are being compared. On down the page, we have an example that uses as. But if it doesn't have either of those two words within the comparison, it's not a simile. One more thing before I leave this one. The word similar that we use comes from this same Greek word root. So it may help you to remember what a simile is, to think, okay, it's a comparison where things are similar. You got to have the like or as in there, but the word itself can kind of give you a clue to what it means, which is a beautiful thing about all Greek words. Okay, a metaphor, it's a lot like a simile. In fact, the effect is the same. You're comparing two things that are unlike, but trying to draw that similarity between them. You're just not using the like or as. So in this case, we basically have the same figure of speech, but instead, in metaphor mode, we just say that one thing is the other. Her smile is a sunrise. We mean the same thing as up here. We're just we're constructing the saying a little bit different. We don't have the like or as. Another one you might hear on a regular basis, he is a rock in troubled times. Meaning that he can be relied upon. He's going to be steady. It's a metaphor. We could even say it in simile mode. He is like a rock in troubled times. Okay, moving on to personification. Another common one, certainly in children's stories, you see personification all over the place, but we still use it in our language, even if we're not writing stories aimed at children. Personification is when we give human characteristics to something that is not human, either an object or an animal. Like in this example, the sunflowers waved hello. This verb waved is not something that sunflowers can do in a realistic sense. The wind may make them sway back and forth and they appear to be waving, but we're personifying that action. We're kind of characterizing it as something that a human would do, so that we relate to whatever that comparison is a little bit more. The wind whistled through the trees, or sang through the hills. Is it literally whistling or singing? No, it isn't, but it may sound like it is, which is why we're personifying it in that way. Okay, next word, it looks like hyperbole, but it's pronounced hyperbole, kind of similar in pronunciation to simile. Even if we don't know what this is, we use it all the time. It's when we over exaggerate something. We exaggerate something to the degree that it couldn't be true, but we're doing it for effect. Good hyperbole is so exaggerated that it is absurd. Nobody would believe it, but they understand what you're trying to say. Like in this one, I was so embarrassed, I just died. No, you didn't literally die, or you wouldn't be writing the sentence or saying it. That's hyperbole, an exaggeration. I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. There's another one. Horses are about, 2,000 pounds. A person could not eat a whole horse in a sitting. But saying it in that way, in a hyperbolic manner, really creates the sense that, yeah, this person's really hungry or really embarrassed or really whatever. I'm so bored I thought I would die. I hope you're not feeling that now, but if you are, I can handle it. Okay, next one, idiom. This doesn't really have much to do with the word idiot, what we shouldn't be calling people. An idiom actually is a common expression where knowing the words doesn't help you determine the meaning of the expression. In fact, knowing the meaning of the words might even be a barrier to you knowing what the expression means. These are sayings that just sort of develop, I guess, in our culture, and people start to hear them enough that they use them themselves and start to agree upon what they mean. But it's raining cats and dogs is a good example. It's just it seems absurd to think of cats and dogs falling out of the sky out of clouds in any normal sense. Um, but we know that the saying means that it's raining heavily. It's raining so heavily that everything's coming down, even the cats and the dogs. But idioms are sayings that if you were learning our language for the first time, you would really have a hard time with, because looking up the definitions of the words wouldn't really help you understand the meaning. You might just have to look the saying itself up. All right, and then our last of the 6 is onomatopoeia, a really fun word to say once you learn how to say it. It never becomes fun to spell, I'll say that about it. But onomatopoeia is when a word in some way imitates its sound or meaning. You see these a lot in comic books, like crack, boom, snap, pop, written out in action balloons. But you see them in more formal sentences as well. The horse's hooves clop clopped down the street. The branches cracked from the amount of ice that was on them. Crack is an onomatopoeia. It kind of sounds like its meaning, even though we don't really think of it being that way. All right, so those are our 6 types of figurative language to get a handle on. I would say be familiar with all 6 as you get ready to take post-tests and as you get ready to GED ready as well. These appear quite often on both tests. Okay, we have another paragraph here, and it says some words are domain specific. We're kind of veering away from figurative language here for just a second. That means that they're used mainly in a particular domain or field of study. So, this is jargon that may only have a certain meaning within an industry or a particular job or field or something like that. For example, certain words are used in medicine. You may need to learn these words if you study medicine. You may also need to learn certain medical words to understand your own health. Other words are used in the financial field. You might need to learn these words if you work for a bank. You might also want to learn the words to understand your own finances. If you come across domain-specific words, note them. Can you figure out what they mean by context? If you're not sure, see if there's a glossary or consult a dictionary, which is great in the real world. It won't be helpful on the test because you're not going to have access to a glossary or a dictionary. But just knowing, recognizing the field of study or work that's being discussed, may clue you into the meaning of some of those words. In the field I'm in, education, we have domain-specific language too, some of which you're familiar with. Pre-test, post-test, assessment, review, things of that nature that have a specific meaning in the field of education. They might have different meanings in other fields. That's okay. That's what domain-specific language kind of is. All right, in our example, I think we've got some good examples of both figurative language and domain-specific language. All right, we've got a simile. The explanation was as clear as mud. We've got the as in there. That's a simile. I almost think that this qualifies as idiom and maybe even a little bit hyperbole too. Certainly it's ironic. Because what we really mean is that it was not clear at all. We're expressing it in a way contrary to its meaning. So it's a simile, but it's got a little bit of other figurative language going on too. And that's a good time to bring up. Sometimes figurative language could meet the definition of more than one. I see things all the time that are both idioms and hyperbole. They're overstatement or exaggeration for effect, but there are sayings that are so common within our culture that they have reached the level of idiom. Like I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. That's a good example. Okay, the domain-specific language. A respiratory infection can affect your lungs, causing inflammation. We got a lot of domain-specific terminology there. Respiratory, infection, inflammation, probably even lungs. These words can have different meanings in different fields. If you're in computer science, infection might mean a computer virus instead of a medical condition. So words can have slightly different meanings if they're used in different domains. All right, you're in just a second about to pause the video and go through the work. But again, remember on these reading lessons, I would like for you to go through the whole thing. You're going to be reading the passages as well and answering the questions. When you're done, you can resume the video and we'll go over and explain the answers. Let's see what kind of text we got here. The last one is one on kind of the practicalities of using credit cards, which I found to be scary and helpful when I first read it. We've got another passage. This looks like a literary or fictional passage. It's called Grandma's Famous Sweet Potato Pie, kind of like some of the others we've read. It's going to be a very true to life, real world fictional passage. But nevertheless, it is made up and has characters and dialogue and all the things that fiction has. Okay, take a pause and do this work, and I'll see you back here in just a little bit when you're ready to go over it. All right, starting out with the guided practice. So we're asked to find the phrase that includes figurative language, determine whether it's a simile, metaphor, personification, or hyperbole, and explain your reasoning. It's B. It is a simile because it uses the word like, and I think the meaning is that the room is really cold. Okay, for 2 through 5, we're determining whether, we're first going to find the figurative language and underline it. Then we'll classify it as simile, metaphor, personification, or hyperbole. Looks like idiom and automatopoeia are off the table. It's just those 4 in this list. And then, a step beyond what we were asked to do here, what do you think it means? Like, what kind of effect is the writer trying to convey by using this figure of speech? Okay, so number 2. I'm so tired I could sleep for a week is our figurative language. And of course, that's hyperbole. It's overstatement, exaggeration. And the meaning is this person is really tired, beyond exhausted. Okay, number 3. The house was a circus. In the basic sense, it's metaphor. We're comparing the house to a circus. We don't have like or as in there. I've had students also answer idiom before because it's just kind of a common saying that we have, so-and-so was a circus. I would accept that answer. Okay, number 4, the figurative language is they're the biggest gossips in the world. Another example of hyperbole. I guess the cousins could be the biggest gossips in the world, but we have no way of proving it or knowing it without knowing all the world's people. So it's absolutely hyperbole. All right, number 5, because the windows stare at me is a good example of personification. The windows cannot literally do the action of a verb like staring, but I think we know what the author means. That just the look of the windows is creepy in its silence. All right, scrolling past the grandma's passage here. All right, sorry for the little pause there, but I realized I needed to do a little bit of work on this too before I was ready to talk about it. But we are moving down to 6, and this is about the family recipe. So question 6 says, which of the following phrases from the story includes figurative language? And it's C, it's not because you're afraid I'm going to die and take this recipe to my grave. Hyperbole, certainly the grandma is not literally taking the recipe to her grave. Hopefully not. Okay, 7, which of the following phrases from the story does not include figurative language? Kind of a tough question, but it's C. The speaker here is trying to convey something visually, but there's no figurative language in it. A is a simile. B is hyperbole, better than anyone in the world. And D, there's a little bit of actually D is personification. So C is the only one that doesn't have figurative language. All right, and then we went into the passage, the informational passage about credit cards. The point of this passage was to get you used to working with domain-specific language. Question 8 says, what is a credit card? Which is, a question about domain-specific language. It's D, a form of payment that lets you delay paying. Hopefully no one answered B, a popular way to get things for free, because I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you still got to pay for those things. Okay, moving on to question 9. In these, we're just supposed to define in our own words some of these domain-specific terms. So number 9, we're looking at the word application. My answer was, informational document for a company to determine credit worthiness. And notice in my definition, I'm connecting to the domain. I don't want to just say, a piece of paper that you fill out with your information, because I want to connect to the domain that this term is part of. So if we're talking about finances and credit cards, then I'm also connecting to that concept of why this document exists in that domain. All right, number 10, financial information, relating to your money and the management of your money. 11 is credit check, so an assessment or check of your creded history. The summarizing whether you've paid your bills on time and whether you have paid your financial obligations. And then 12, penalties. In the domain of credit cards and finances, penalties mean like extra fees or charges that you are given that you have to pay monetarily. If you're thinking of the world of sports, you're thinking maybe, of a penalty flag that a football referee throws down on a play. Maybe if you're thinking about the world of law and criminal justice, a penalty is a punishment that someone pays for a crime. But the point is that the words that have literal meanings may have slightly different shades of meaning in different domains of study and work. All right, in number 13, what does income mean in this context, in this domain? And it's D, money received on a regular basis, usually in exchange for work. And then 14, what does debt mean? I didn't have to read this passage to know the answer to the question, but as I've said before, answer based on the passage. D, owing money that has been borrowed. I'm guessing that most of us know what the meaning of debt is if we're at the level of adult and adult education. All right, that ends this lesson. We'll be continuing in Strategy 7 to talk about strategies for defining unfamiliar vocabulary words and phrases. And I hope you are continuing to progress, that the practice is going well, and that you're continuing to grow. And look forward to seeing you when you come in and post-test or when you come in for extra help. I don't think I've said it in a while, but you are absolutely allowed to come into open enrollment hours as a distance learning student. That's Monday through Thursday, 11 through 12 here at the South Ark East campus. But, if you're at home, you're working through some of these things and there are issues that aren't clear, or you want a little extra help or practice, then that time is available to you. Either, coming in person, although I understand people are in different locations and maybe don't have the availability. So we could do something like a phone call or a Zoom meeting, at a time that works for you, in a place that works for you. So, certainly utilize the resources you have, whether that be us here on campus or me as the teacher. That's why I'm here, is to help you along the way. And it's part of my job to do it, and I certainly don't mind doing so. Hope you're doing well, and I will see you in Strategy 7.